After a break during Advent and Christmas, and then last week, or 2 weeks really, celebrating our church anniversary, here we are again, returning to the series on Matthew. It's been a while since we've done that. November, actually, was when Pastor Carson closed out chapter 12. And so as we begin chapter 13 today, I think it's probably helpful for us to have a little bit of a review of what has taken place leading up to this point. So at the close of, actually all of chapter 12 highlighted Jesus' authority over religious law, his authority over the Sabbath. That chapter demonstrated Jesus' divine power when we saw healings. And then, of course, he was questioned about those things. And when he was questioned about healings and his the work on the Sabbath, Jesus responded. He condemned, really, the hypocrisy of the religious leaders of that time. And at the end of that chapter, he redefined what a spiritual family is all about. And he did all of those kinds of things while he was pointing to his death and resurrection. So chapter 13 here sort of represents this shift, if you will, where Jesus begins to speak in parables. This chapter, Carson's going to go through them with you in the next weeks, but this chapter contains 7 parables about the kingdom of heaven. But this shift really isn't just a shift in Matthew's style of writing. It's not really even a shift in Jesus' style of teaching. It really is Jesus' response. It's a theological response to all of that resistance that he was receiving, to that resistance that he's been experiencing from the religious authorities, from the religious leaders. And so Matthew places this whole discourse, is what it's called, really, this whole section of teaching about God's empire, about teaching about the kingdom of heaven. He places it immediately after Jesus himself has been accused of being possessed by demons and has been rejected by the religious leaders of that time. And after Jesus redefines what it means to be a part of his family, if you will. Those closing words in chapter 12 say, while he was still speaking to the crowds, his mother and brothers were standing outside wanting to speak to him. And someone told him, look, your mother and your brothers are here to see you. But to the one who said that, Jesus said, well, who are my mother and my brothers? And he pointed to his disciples and he said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my mother and my brother. Whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my family. That's my family. Those are my people. Jesus has spoken very directly. He's spoken very clearly in all of this, making it very clear why he is there, what his ministry is all about, who sent him, on whose authority he's teaching. He makes that very clear. And because of that, he's rejected. And so he shifts his teaching. And as he shifts his teaching, these parables emerge. Parables emerge. Whenever there has been a truth that's already been spoken, and spoken plainly, spoken clearly, and it still gets rejected, well then, these parables emerge. The parables are Jesus' response to this persistent misunderstanding of who he is and what he represents. The parables are Jesus' response to resistance. They're a response to this ongoing misunderstanding of who he is and what he's all about. So the word parable, we're building all this up so that you understand what's going to happen here in chapter 13. The word parable literally means to throw alongside. throw alongside. Jesus' parables were stories that were sort of parallel or cast alongside the truth in order to better illustrate that truth. So his parables were teaching aids, if you will, and they can be thought of as extended analogies or some kind of inspired comparison, if you will. A common description of a parable is that it's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. An earthly story with a heavenly meaning. And these short narratives that you're going to see throughout all of chapter 13 show us something about God's empire, about God's kingdom, about the kingdom of heaven. And they help to engage the hearer, the listener's imagination. And they also challenge the listener's perspectives and their assumptions on things. Parables often draw from objects that are a part of everyday life. Farming, we're going to hear about that. Gardening. But then there's this unexpected twist that happens at the end that underlines the surprising and the gracious, the demanding, the countercultural nature of God's kingdom or God's reign. And the twist is that surprise at the end that is about God's nature, tells us what the kingdom of heaven is going to be like. So, for those who have welcomed Jesus, those who have received, for those who have heard his word and followed, the parables then confirm their commitment to, and they help to expand their understandings of God's empire. Parables just reaffirm their commitment to that and help expand their understanding of it. With these parables, Jesus isn't trying to be clever. He's forcing a decision about hearing, about listening, and responding. So, with all of that in mind, here's the beginning of chapter 13 in Matthew. It says this: "That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, 'Listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on a path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. If you have ears, hear.'" If you have ears, listen to what I have to say, Jesus is saying. Now, this parable is often referred to as the parable of the sower. You've heard that before, right? Parable of the sower. But the sower actually plays a minor role, if you will, in this story. We don't really know that much about this sower, except that he or she did not prepare the soil. They didn't till the ground before planting. Who does that? Really? If you want to have some kind of yield, aren't you going to till the ground? Make sure it's ready to receive the seeds? I don't know, but the sower doesn't do that. All we know is that the sower goes out and the sower goes and sows, and they throw these seeds, and it appears that the sower is just kind of throwing them out there with reckless abandon, sort of willy-nilly, not really caring where those seeds happen to fall. And those seeds fall on different kinds of soil, only one of which is actually labeled good. Only one of them is labeled good. And after the mention of the sower and the seeds, the emphasis then of this parable shifts into the soils. It shifts to focus on the soils. So I think the parable is probably more appropriately named the parable of the four soils, because that's really what it's about. It's not about the sower necessarily, it's about the soils. When I was growing up, I remember hearing this story, this parable, pretty frequently, actually, in Sunday school and that type of thing. And the emphasis or the question that was always asked after you heard the story was, well, what kind of soil are you? What kind of soil are you? And of course, the implication was that we were to be good soil. I have to tell you, it always made me feel bad. Even if I was a good girl or good soil, the implication was that there were people out there who were bad soil. And as a kid, I liked math, and so I would do the math on this story, and 1/4 of the seeds were good, so that meant that 3/4 of the seeds were bad? It's not really the case. It seemed exclusive to me, implying that most people were inherently bad. And I couldn't understand that. I couldn't accept that. If I was created by God in God's image, if all people were created by God and in God's image, how could they be inherently bad? Didn't they have worth or value because they were created by God? Didn't God declare God's creation of human beings to be very good? So as I grew older and I learned more about the interpretations of this parable, I was grateful to discover that this parable is not about people. It's not about people. It's not about different kinds of people, good or bad people. The parable is about response. It's about the response. It's about different responses to the word. Whether you respond positively or negatively, people are still good. It's the response to the word. Different responses to the same word. Different responses to Jesus and to God's reign. In this parable, we have the same sower who scatters the same seeds with the same reckless abandon on all of the different soils. Same sower, same seeds, same generosity, if you will, with those seeds. But there's a different outcome. The focus is on the response or the reception, not on the distribution. Focus is on the response. The emphasis is not on the soils themselves, but on how we, or the different receptions or receiving the word about God's kingdom, about the kingdom of heaven. It's how the kingdom of heaven is received. So, as the disciples hear this story or this teaching or parable from Jesus, they can definitely sense that something has changed. Something has shifted. Surely there is something different in Jesus' approach to teaching, but they also notice that there's something different about Jesus himself. Not just the way he's teaching, there's something different here about Jesus. And so they ask him in verse 10, why do you speak to them in parables? Why are you doing that? This has changed. What's going on here? They didn't ask this because they were curious about his teaching style. They were deeply concerned. They wanted to know what's going on here. They recognized that there's something deeper going on here, and they want to understand. And so when they ask Jesus why he speaks in parables, he responds this way in verses 11 through 17. He answered, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For those who have more, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing they do not perceive, and hearing they do not listen, nor do they understand. With them indeed is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah that says, "You will indeed listen but never understand, and you will indeed look but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. Truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and hear what you hear, but did not hear it." Long section here. In this section, Jesus is quoting from the prophet Isaiah. He's telling his disciples that by speaking in parables, he's fulfilling Scripture. He's fulfilling what the prophets foretold. And he's naming that condition that the prophets so frequently talked about: seeing without perceiving, hearing without understanding. That's what the prophets talked about all the time. You're seeing it, but you're not really paying attention. You're hearing it, but you're not listening. That really is covenant language. Matthew includes this, I would call it a reassuring word, really, from Jesus, that the disciples not only see the deeper meaning of what's happening right there in front of them, but he also reassures them that what they are experiencing right now is what the prophets, those religious folks from the age before, longed to hear. It's what they wanted to hear, that the Scripture then is being fulfilled right there in their midst, that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's right there in front of them if they are paying attention. It's there in front of them if they're paying attention. Parables don't hide the truth from those who are sincerely seeking it, from those who are really seeking it. They expose a refusal to respond to the truth. They don't hide the truth. They expose a refusal to respond to it. And so after that explanation, talking about the prophets, of why he's preaching in parables or teaching in parables, he then goes on to explain the parable of the sower, or the parable of the four soils that he taught a few verses back. He interprets it for them. And I think it's important for us to note that Jesus doesn't usually explain or interpret his parables. He doesn't usually do that. His parables are often short. He throws out this little nugget for people to see if they're paying attention, for those who have ears to hear, eyes to see. So the fact that he goes on to explain this particular parable should give us pause. It should tell us something. So we're going to hear what he has to say, or that explanation or that interpretation of it in chapter 13, verses 18 through 23. He says, "Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. That is what is sown on the path. As for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of this age and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. I think that Jesus explains this parable to them because it's the key to the rest of his teaching. It sort of unlocks, if you will, the rest of the parables that he tells in the remainder of the chapter. He's basically saying to them, if you don't get this parable, I'm going to make sure you get this parable. If you misunderstand it, you're not going to understand the rest of my teachings. The parable of the weeds, the mustard seed, the treasure, all of those things that Carson's going to be sharing with you all in the coming weeks. Jesus wants to be sure that they get it. He wants to be sure they understand, the disciples. That's why he explains it just to them. He wants to be sure they fully understand what's going on. And in Matthew, understanding is about reception, or about receiving it, obediently receiving it. Understanding isn't necessarily agreement with it. Understanding is actually fruit, bearing fruit. If you understand it, you're going to bear fruit. Understanding is fruit. We've already seen that throughout the Gospel of Matthew already. In chapter 7, Jesus talks about houses that were built on hearing and doing fruit, and trees that were known by their fruit. This is about fruit. Fruit isn't some kind of extra credit that we get or we give. It's evidence of hearing. It's evidence of responding. In Matthew, to understand is to respond appropriately in obedience and to bear fruit. So what does this mean? What's it mean for all of us? The kingdom of heaven is already here. It is. It is already here. And one day it will be fully revealed when Jesus returns. How we respond to that is not going to stop the reality of the kingdom of heaven. It's a given. It's a done deal. And that kingdom will not fail because people resist. It won't. Actually, resistance really is part of how the kingdom does get revealed. So the more appropriate question is, how do we respond? How do we respond? This parable of the sower, or the parable of the four soils, is about our response. The parable reveals the same sower, it reveals the same seeds, it reveals the same way they get scattered, the same generosity over all of those soils. It's about response. Different outcomes. Different outcomes, our response. God is still speaking. God is still sowing. How we receive the word, how we hear the word, how we respond to the word, that is what bears fruit. That's what bears fruit. And so may we hear, fully hear and understand and respond and bear fruit for Christ's kingdom. Amen. Amen.